Hey, how's it going? My name is James, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how I made this half-blind dovetail and put it into this cell phone stand. Come check it out. They're called half-blind because when you look at them for the front, you can't see a dovetail, but when you turn it to the side there, you can see the dovetails there. The biggest application for these would have to be probably in a drawer front. So if you imagine this is a drawer, maybe in a kitchen or whatever, and you want to have the strength of a dovetail, but you don't necessarily want the dovetail showing through in the front face, this is a joint you're going to use. So I'm going to show you how I made this one. Come check it out. Well, I'm going to start this project by selecting the pieces of wood I'm going to be using. I already had a piece for the tails all prepared, but for the pins, I'm going to take this piece of wood, mark it, and then begin to saw it right in half. This isn't the best kind of saw to be doing this kind of rip cutting with. It's the only one I have for the job though. One of the big limitations of it is you can't go all the way through the board because the saw gets caught halfway through. But to counter this problem, I just come at it from the other side as well. And first actually I come from the sides and just complete the lines all the way to the bottom. And this gives me a reference when I'm on the other side to make sure the lines follow exactly down to the middle, so that when I eventually make it all the way through, my lines match up perfectly. Because the wood's in a vise, when it starts to feel like the saw is getting stuck, it means you're probably right through the wood, and that ended up being the case here. Now it's a matter of making sure that this is all a uniform thickness. I'm going to find the lowest corner on this piece and then make a mark all the way around, and then just take a plane to go towards that line, so I have a piece that's all the same thickness all throughout. Once that's done, it's time to lay out for the joints and start marking the material. I'm going to start with the tails and going to make the tails just a bit less thick than the thickness of the pin board. This is because the tails aren't going to stick all the way through the pin board. You want to make it a bit less. And then when it comes to marking out the pins, again, you're going to just take the height of your tails and mark it on the top there. And then you're also going to take the thickness of the tails and make that the depth line on the pin board. This will all make a bit more sense when we see the joint coming together. Now it's time to mark out the tails. There's different ways to do this, but what I like to do is mark out the sides first. I'll go ahead and square lines across the sides at an equal distance from the side. And then I'll throw it in the vise, and my goal now is to put one of those again in the middle. And to do this, I'll figure out the exact middle point and measure the sides and put half of it on one side of the middle, half of it on the other, and then just square those lines across. Now at this point, you would normally also mark the dovetail lines down to the depth line, but because I'm using a dovetail guide, I don't need to do that. I just need to saw straight across, get my guide in there, and then they'll take me at the right angle down to the depth line. And I'll just repeat that process for all 4 cuts. The jig that I'm using here is from the Jonathan Katz Moses store. You should check it out, it's a really good one. Now it's time to remove that little bit of material in the middle. Last week I showed you a different method, but this week I'm going to show you a method that's probably the most common of taking a coping saw and getting the bulk of the material out. And then it's to the bench to chisel out the rest, usually just taking really small bites until you end up in that knife wall and can come right down that center line. I'll flip it over and do the same thing, again just taking small bites with the chisel. You don't want to move that knife wall, and then finally, once you get in there, just taking it right down. To remove the material on the side, it's just a matter of sawing down to that line and then popping the pieces off. You just want to make sure you saw it in a straight line because this line will be important later on in the joint. And once you've cleaned that up, you're actually going to switch and put the pin board in. And now you can put that tail piece over it to mark out the tails so you can transfer those marks. I'm going to use a marking knife here. And once I've made the marks, I'm actually going to come back with that knife and make the marks even deeper so that I can see them easier when I remove the material. There's different ways you can try to remove the waste in this joint. A lot of people try to take it to the drill press or try to use whatever tools they have around to help them. I find it works best to kind of saw whatever you can and then come with the chisel for the rest. So I'll show you how I did that in just a second. So in a normal dovetail, we would just saw right across the face of this, but because we want to preserve that one edge, we're going to saw more at an angle, and we're going to make sure we don't go across our depth line or we don't go across the line where the dovetail is going to be sitting on the face. So that's kind of why we're at an angle here. We're going to saw as much as we can and then take it to the bench and remove the rest of this material with the chisel. The best way that I've found to do this is to actually go to that depth line and then pare down towards it. Make the line even more defined with the chisel and mallet, and then continue to pare down towards that. Eventually you'll be able to be a lot more forceful as you're chiseling down, because you'll be a lot deeper and it'll be harder to move that line. And then as you continue to go further down, you'll actually be able to start chipping out material from the end of the board, and that will chip out very nicely and you'll start to remove a lot of material quickly. Even though we're able to remove some fairly large pieces of material, this does still take some time. Obviously, the sharper your chisel is, the easier this is going to go for you. But regardless, just have patience and eventually you'll get to a place where most of the material is out. Every now and then you're going to want to check to make sure you're not getting too close to that depth line, because you don't want to finish this on the bench yet. Eventually want to take it to the vise. And once you get about to this point where you're fairly close to those lines, you can pop it in the vise and finish the rest from here. You may have noticed that there's now a board behind the piece of what I've been working on. That's because if I didn't have that there and I started doing this kind of chiseling, that piece would just break right off. So this is just to help prevent this piece from breaking as we chisel it. And at this point, it's just a matter of slowly working towards the lines that we've already marked out. If we've marked out correctly and we chisel carefully, this joint should fit really well. Some of the challenges here is you don't want to go too fast, because when you go fast, it's easy to quickly lose material and the joint starts fitting a bit sloppily. It's been said many times, it's easier to take material away than it is to put material back, and that's really important to keep in mind here as you're fitting this joint. So once I'm in a place where I feel like I'm getting close, I'll actually try to fit the joint together, and that will show me which areas still need to have some remove. So I'll keep kind of interchanging between trying to get the joint to fit and then looking if there's any bruising or any areas that are high that need to be removed, and I'll just slowly keep working to take it down until eventually the joint is ready to be fit completely together. Again, the temptation here is going to be to rush or to feel like you're not going fast enough, and usually it's in those times when you make the biggest mistake. So I just encourage you to just go slow, go at your own pace, and just take time to make sure this joint's going to come together really nicely. And here we finally got the joint together nicely. It seems to be fitting pretty well. There's always going to be areas where there's maybe a little bit of a gap here or there, but overall I'm pretty happy with this. I'm actually going to be turning this joint into a cell phone holder. So I'm going to mark out the line where the cell phone is going to sit and just mark it deep with a knife. Then I'm going to come and chisel towards that line with my chisels, making a bit of a ledge there. And then after I'm done that, I'm actually going to take the saw and make that line a bit deeper so that I can once again chisel towards that line and complete the ledge. Once I've done that, I'll just make sure my cell phone actually will sit on this ledge. I'll cut it to length and end up with something that looks like this. And now the joint's ready to come together. Gluing this together is fairly simple. Just spread a bunch of glue in the pins, get some on the tails, push the thing together, and then usually I take some plain shavings to wipe away any of the excess glue, and then just leave it to dry. Sometimes you want to make sure the joint is properly seated, and clamps can be a good way of doing this. And once that's all done and you left it to dry, you should end up with something that looks like this. A hand plane is usually the best way to clean up the joint after it's been glued together. Just taking off any of the excess, any of the marks from the marking knife and anything like that, and just giving it a really smooth finish. Also put it on its side and just make sure all the sides are nicely planed and even. And once that's done, it's time to apply a little bit of a finish to make the joint really pop. And with that, we're going to be about done. Well, I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. Again, I'm going to turn this into a little cell phone stand and just use it around the house to kind of prop up my cell phone in different ways. The joint itself doesn't really give it much extra strength, and it's not really what this joint is used for, but I think it does give a nice pleasing look, and it also was a lot of fun to make. Well, that's all for me. Thank you so much for checking out this video. There's more on the channel if you like this one. Hope to see you next time. Until then, take care.